Wipers by Ken Mitchell. Prologue, Part 1. Passchendaele Ridge, Ypres Salient, Belgium, Old Earth, 1917. The explosion 30 meters behind Ian McElroy wrapped around his body in its sea of all-embracing pain as he dug his fingers into the crude wooden duckboard he had been running across 2 seconds ago. As the heat and pressure of the blast washed over McElroy like a gust front from the pits of hell, he could feel a sense of weightlessness, both strange and terrifying. Whomp! What little breath McElroy had left in his lungs was crushed out of him by the impact of his body atop an involuntarily improvised flying carpet made of trench duckboard. For a moment, or an hour, he couldn't tell which, he could do nothing but clutch onto his fragment of duckboard and stare blindly into the wall of mud he was propped up against. Every sense he had in him was numb and concussed. Slowly, as he lay facing the all-embracing mud of the side of one of the millions of shell holes in this godforsaken land, Ian started to register his senses one by one. First came the wet and cold in his lower torso and legs. He pried his eyes open enough to look down, seeing to his horror the lower half of his body was covered in the water that was filling up the newly made shell hole. Through his concussed consciousness, McElroy felt a stab of fear. There were many, many horrible ways to die in this hellscape of a battlefield, but the worst was drowning in the water and the mud. I hope my pistol is still on my belt, Ian thought to himself. A quick finger pull would be better than dying by choking down this evil mud. Even as this ran through his brain, he knew he wouldn't do it. If nothing else, Ian McElroy was a fighter, and he would never give up when there's a chance to survive. The next sensation to return was the pain. Pain embraced his body like a blanket, wrapping itself around and through every part of his being. But all pains are not created equal, and Ian realized the throbbing in his left arm seemed worse than the rest of his agony. He glanced down at the torn remains of his uniform to see the top portion of his arm, bent in a way that was never intended. Broken, obviously. Not good, he thought, considering how climbing out of this hole just got a whole lot harder. The next moment, McElroy and his loyal duckboard were bounced a foot into the air by a nearby shell concussion, and as they slammed back down into his shell hole, he could feel the ladder and his body slipping deeper into the dark, disgusting pool of water. He felt the cold water reach his armpits. Another shell like that, he thought, and Aunt Judy will be getting a "we are sorry to inform you" telegram. Ian looked around for some point of purchase, some solid handhold that he could use to drag himself higher. There, just at the extremity of his reach, was the bottom of a boot buried in the side wall of the hole. Holding onto the duckboard as best he could with his knees, McElroy reached up with his fully functional arm and grasped the boot and tried to pull himself up to a higher elevation. The boot and skeletal leg that it was attached to pulled free of the wall and bones showered down on his arm. "Well, Fritz, you are no help," McElroy thought darkly as he tossed the boot and the remains of the German soldier's leg aside. No help at all. Another nearby concussion shook Ian in his perch. He scanned his surroundings for smoothing, anything that might hold his weight higher up the shell hole wall. Nothing. Nothing at all. Damn. The three collectors raced along behind their shield carrier across the duckboards towards the location of the recruit. Around the shield screamed metal shrapnel and the concussive force of waves of compressed air unleashed by the explosions of the heavy German rounds. "Tavor, take the shield to the top of that rise and plant it, then get back here. This one's going to be tight, so don't screw around," Maven shouted into her comms. The squad leader watched as her troop started to carry out the order, then turned to the job of extracting this new recruit from the precarious situation he was in. "Pickle, take the lead and slide down. Juno, run the belay and I'll anchor. Come on, let's go, we've got no time." Maven turned around and looked for Juno, but although she could see the shield generator in the shape of an ancient army spade planted in place, her collector was nowhere in sight. She looked around at the chaotic, nightmarish landscape of her collection site. Trees had been reduced to splintered skeletons, and the ground was pockmarked with craters filled with the ghastly remains of modern warfare. The steel rain of artillery gashed through a swirl of gray and black clouds in the gloomy sky, illuminated by the flashes of exploding shells. Distant cries of her recruits' wounded comrades mixed with the cacophony of war, creating a haunting, never-ending symphony of suffering. She blinked her eyes closed for a second, found focus, and got her mind focused on the task. "Tavor, where are you?" she shouted into the comm microphone mounted on her collar. "I'm good, Maeve. I slid a bit on the other side, but I'm in the shield and coming your way," came a breathless-sounding reply. Maven looked down and decided Tavor could look after himself. 9 kilometers across German lines, a team of 20 swarmed under the frown of their 21 centimeters Mrs. 16 heavy howitzer gun, preparing it to fire again. The ultra-heavy mortar was nearly glowing hot from heavy usage over the last 2-day period, and the crews stumbled their way through their robotic-like tasks in near exhaustion. 2 men pried a high-explosive shrapnel shell into the breech of the gun, and the ram operator hit the hydraulic switch to send the shell up into firing position. Next, 2 more men muscled firing charge into the chamber, and it was again rammed home. A 5th crewman placed the primer charge into the back of the powder cartridge, and barely got his hand clear of the breech before the gun captain snapped the gun closed. "Die Waf ist bereit, bleiben Sie frei," he cried, warning all to stand clear of the breach. Wachtmeister Karl Bauer pulled the string, and the huge Krupp gun spat death towards the hated Tommy lines. "Maven, the terminal round is dropped. You have 55 seconds, Control warned into her earbuds. This one was taking way too long. Ian tried to force his pounding, foggy brain to concentrate on something other than clinging onto his duckboard. Something was going on around him. If he could just concentrate, perhaps it was something he could use to. He felt a tug on his right shoulder and turned his head around to see a face he didn't know behind an arm that had stretched out to grab him. "I've got you, mate. I'm on a belay. We are going to pull you out, but we gotta do this quickly, so don't fight me. You are banged up a bit, so this may hurt, but we've not got time to do it nice." "You ready, mate?" the face said. Ian nodded his head, and he felt the hand wrap around his equipment harness and start to pull. He started to stir, to figure out some way to make his rescuer's job easier, but the face yelled out at him, "No, mate, don't do anything. I'm belayed, we'll pull you. Just slide along, right?" To his surprise, he felt his body sliding up the side of the shell hole and out of the water, slowly at first, and then at a faster speed. Then his broken arm hit a tree root, and the world dissolved into nothing but agony. "Maven. 30 seconds to impact, Maven." The calm controller's voice sounded in the team leader's ear. "Round has reached apogee and is falling." Like that matters, Maeve thought. Like I give a damn about the orientation and travel path of a round that is about to wipe us all well and good unless we get out of this hole. It was time to not be nice. "We gotta risk blowing OPSEC. Just retract him, team. We've gotta go," Maeve shouted to her crew. Pickle recentered his grip on the recruit and nodded, and Juno braced himself against the belay spice and hit the retract button. The strong monofilament line quickly spooled back into the reel, quickly dragging both Pickle and the recruit to the rim of the shell hole. After the event, not one of the 3 collectors could exactly remember what had happened in the 15-meter dash across the muddy ridge between those 2 massive shell holes, although all could remember the dive over the top of the shell hole that contained the portal tunnel, sliding down the side of the hole and into the entrance chamber. They could all remember the snap of the door and the slight hum of machinery as the 3 of them lay panting on the floor alongside the huddled, moaning, broken mass of their recruit. Maven leaned her mud-covered body against the tunnel wall and looked around. 4 people, no Tavor. A sickness filled her inside. "Control, where's Tavor? Did he make it back before us?" Silence. "Control, did you copy? Where is Tavor? Is he with you?" "Maven," the familiar voice answered in her earbud, the same voice but in some way different. Emotional, concerned. "I'm afraid Tavor wiped." Maeve's head snapped around and looked down the tunnel towards Control. "What? He wiped? How? What happened? Who screwed up? This was a tight one. But we do the tight ones. He can't have wiped." "I'm sorry," Control said, clearly moved by her associate's distress. "But nobody screwed up on this one. We had him in sight the entire time. When you turned and ran for the egress, Tavor slid back over top of the target hole and down into it. He meant to wipe." Team leader Maven slowly closed her eyes and concentrated on her breathing. Ground in center, Maeve, ground in center. She would mourn later. There was still work to be done. She turned around and looked at the new recruit and realized he was close to going into shock. Work be done indeed. as she administered an anti-shock and pain relief injection into the recruit's damaged arm. Leaning over, she whispered into his ear, "You had better be worth it. Damn your eyes to hell." Prologue, Part 2. In the deep darkness that no mortal could find, someone, that could not be, that should not be, watched, waited and pondered.